Good morning, welcome to Devon Pond Plants, and I've got a video for you this morning to show you how to pot up your pond plants, how to choose the right compost and the right size of basket. Now in most cases obviously the timing of this will be when it suits yourself, so it will be the time you've actually bought the plants or when you first built your pond and so on, but people often ask what's the best time to repot or propagate pond plants, and the answer to that is anytime they're growing actively, so really any time from April through to about August. We're doing this video now in September and it's still a beautiful sunny day here in Devon, and it will stay warm for another few weeks yet, so we're still potting plants up now and we can expect them to put on good root growth. But certainly don't consider potting up pond plants from November through to about February. If you have to plant out at that time of year, it's best to buy them already in a pot with a little bit of soil and plant them directly into soil. So I want to begin by explaining about pond baskets, and those are these perforated baskets you will see for sale in any aquatic retailers, and these are the preferred choice in which to plant pond plants. The holes in the sides are very small, but they basically allow the soil to stay in the basket and allow roots to go through the basket and allow oxygen and nutrients to diffuse into the basket to feed the plant. So typically you'll be planting into a basket like this, assuming you haven't already bought the plant in its basket, in which case you're just going to be planting it straight into the pond. But mostly when you buy a pond plant, you're going to want to plant it into a bigger sized basket in order to give it room to grow. And the minimum size of basket I really feel is appropriate is something of this sort of size. 2 litre, 2.5 litre, 3 litre. But you can't overpot a pond plant, so the bigger the basket, the more time the plant will spend in it before you need to do the job all over again. If you've bought plants bare root, they will turn up looking something like that. They will usually be root washed, so there won't be any soil on the plant, and it will just be the plant itself with a section of root ready to plant into a basket. So firstly, you need to choose the size of basket that's appropriate, and if you watched my video on pond plant placement, you will have chosen a basket that's more or less the same depth as the shelf on which you want to place it. So I'm going to use this 3 litre basket, which will stand nicely on a shelf about 18 to 20 centimetres deep, which is fairly typical for a garden pond. And the next thing you're going to decide is what material you're going to plant the plant into. Now, my recommended solution is aquatic compost. Now, this is aquatic compost. It's a specialist product which will come in a bag which will say aquatic soil or aquatic compost, and it's specially formulated not to dissolve easily and leach out into the water, not to have too high a level of nutrients, just enough to let the plants do well, and it's a fairly solid and heavy material. This is it. You can see it's got some fairly hefty lumps in it. It has little bits of clay in it, little bits of gravel in it, so it's quite a heavy and solid medium. There are other things you can use. You can use your ordinary garden soil. If you have half decent garden soil, there's nothing wrong with using that. This is typical topsoil down in here in Devon, but there are a lot more fines in this than there are in the aquatic compost, so it will tend to leach out of the basket a little more easily, and of course if it's come from your garden, it'll contain weed seeds which will germinate and grow in the pot and cause you a job of having to weed it after you've planted it. A few weeks have gone past, you'll get a lot of weeds coming up. But there's nothing wrong with the soil. It will make very good soil, and it's what we use for water lilies and anything that's standing deep in the pond where the weeds aren't a problem. We just use ordinary topsoil. Please note that topsoil as dug from your garden is not likely to be much the same as topsoil bought in a bag from a garden centre. From a garden centre, it'll typically be very fine. It will contain a lot more loam and fine sand. It'll be quite dark in colour, and while this is a perfectly good medium in which to grow the pond plants, you'll find that it will very quickly leach out of even the small holes in the pot, even if you use a Hessian liner, and a lot of the material will be missing from the basket fairly soon. So it's not really ideal. Peat and multi-purpose compost are nothing like ideal and shouldn't be used under any circumstances. If you're planting it into a natural swimming pond where you're trying to keep the nutrient level very low in order to attain clear water, you're probably going to be planting into gravel, clean gravel such as this. Now, that's absolutely fine for keeping the water clear, but it will mean that the plants will grow a lot more slowly because there's just no nutrients in it. And so those plants have to obtain nutrients directly from the water, and plants such as this Pontideria here, which is a green leafy plant, will often be a bit yellow when they're grown in clean gravel because they're not really getting sufficient nutrients to stay lush and green. Again, that's a choice for natural swimming ponds. So let's assume that we're planting into aquatic compost in an ordinary garden pond, a wildlife pond or something like that. Perfectly simple to plant your plant. Look to see where the plant is actually emerging from the soil, and that is the level which needs to be just below the top of the basket. So this basket is possibly a little bit oversized for this size of plant, but this one here will very quickly fill that basket and mean that you need to pot it all over again into a bigger basket. So better to plant a smaller one in and allow it plenty of room to grow. And if you look carefully, most plants have a sort of a directional way of growing. You can see where the newest material is and the oldest material. So it's just as well not to plant it directly in the centre of the pot, but to offset it slightly so that the new material is growing towards the inside of the pot. This is particularly the case with things with like irises and what have you that have a rhizome. They grow in one direction only, and if you put them in the middle of the pot, they're soon out of that side before they've even used this side. So plant them towards the side of the pot, and to simply put soil in around the plant while holding it just below the surface of the pot. And plant it quite firmly. That will stop all of the compost from leaching out of the basket when you first drop it in the pond, so that you end up with the surface level of the soil in the pot being just below the top edge of the pot, maybe a centimetre, something like that. And then in order to make it look tidy, a double handful of gravel placed around the top will stop the soil from leaching out into the water and give you an attractive result. So this plant will now grow this way, and that plant is potted. Now before you put it in the pond, this might sound ridiculous, but give it a good watering. Because if you don't water it first to get rid of all the air spaces that are within this freshly potted up plant, when you drop this into the pond, you'll get big bubbles of air will burble out of the compost, stirring up that compost, making it loose and bringing some out into the water around the pot. So if you give that a good watering first and then let it drain a little bit and then place it gently into the pond, hardly any soil will dissolve out into the pond. So, as I've just demonstrated, for a plant like this Pontideria cordata, which will grow to be about 60 or 70 centimetres tall, this will be perfectly adequate. It's heavy enough to sit on a shelf without toppling over, and that will be absolutely fine. However, if you have a plant that's going to grow to be much taller, like this purple loosestrife, Lythrum salicaria, this will grow to be quite considerably taller than this one is now, and if that was to stay in a pot of that sort of size standing on a shallow shelf, the likelihood is that in a strong wind it could easily just topple over, blow over, because there isn't sufficient weight in that pot to hold it down. And in that case you're going to need to consider a much bigger basket. Maybe even something as large as the biggest size basket, a 30-litre basket, which will be plenty big enough for that plant for 2 or 3 years to come probably. Now I've just demonstrated how to plant up a fairly vertical plant such as the Pontederia, but how about plants that basically creep along and have very little height but a lot of width? As you can see from this creeping Jenny, it produces a lot of fine roots along all the stems that creep out from the pot. So if I was repotting this plant, I might select a basket like this so that the original plant could go towards one end, and all of this material here with roots on could be planted into the basket like that. And you just need to be careful and keep as many leaves as possible above the surface and most of the leaves below. You don't have to be too fussy with a plant like that, but just carefully dribble the compost in among it and pot it up in the same way, and you'll very quickly have a much larger basket full of material which can then be divided later on and make even more. So I hope you've enjoyed this short video on how to pot up your pond plants, and you can find a lot more information in my book entitled Ponds, A Practical Guide to Construction, Design and Planting, and you can buy this at Amazon or off my own website and various other places, and I hope you enjoy your planting up your pond.